Lijep pozdrav u još jednom UNIDU intervju. Ja sam Klara Zuanić. Na Sveučilištu u Dubrovniku boravi profesor Behringer sa School of Forest, Fisheries and Geomatics Sciences, Sveučilišta u Floridi, pa smo ga ugostili u našem TV studiju. U ovom intervju razgovarat ćemo naravno na engleskom jeziku. Hello, professor, and welcome to our TV studio.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, you are here conducting research on blue crabs since August. Some of the most well-known fishing grounds of blue crabs are located around Florida. So what brings you to Dubrovnik?
So I've studied blue crabs for a while in their native range, so Florida's included in that. And I actually grew up around the Chesapeake Bay, which is sort of the heart of where blue crabs are loved in their native range, but they're an invasive species in the Mediterranean. So we're sort of taking what we've learned about blue crabs and about invasions and about parasites in their native range and looking at theories of how that works in their invaded range. And Croatia is a perfect place to do that.
You kind of led us on a little bit about blue crabs, but can you tell us more in general?
So blue crabs, their range goes from Nova Scotia all the way down to Argentina. So they have a tremendously long native range, and they're fished throughout that range. They're sort of an iconic species, especially in the mid-Atlantic and in the Gulf of Mexico, where in Louisiana they're used in Cajun cooking, and where I grew up they're steamed and they're sort of a cultural culinary icon. But they invaded the Mediterranean back in around the 1940s. They first arrived, and it's just in probably the past 10 to 20 years that they've really exploded in their range and in their abundance here, and they're causing all kinds of problems.
What are the biggest threats to blue crabs? We can say maybe Florida, because you said that here they are invasive.
They are. They're not a welcome species to have here, but back home and throughout much of their range and in South America and in the Caribbean, they're fished. So they're really tasty, and so they're highly sought after. But they're in their native range, probably their biggest threat, and many fished organisms, right? Their biggest threat is humans and overexploitation. And so we're really good as humans at exploiting a resource if we really like it and want it. So they have to be managed carefully in the United States. But here since they're an invasive species and they're not really a cultural sort of culinary icon in the way they are there, they are sort of growing a little bit more unchecked. And so here they're trying to figure out how to, what's going to control them, how to control them, and perhaps fishing is one way to do that.
So how is your collaboration with our Department of Applied Ecology going?
Oh, it's going really well. I mean, it's fantastic. Marina Brelo is sort of my key contact in that unit, and she's been just incredibly helpful in helping me sort of make broader contacts around the Mediterranean, because not only am I working here, but Dubrovnik was my base of operations for getting samples from other places around the Mediterranean, bringing them back here for analysis. And now we're back doing experiments up at the university's wet lab up in Bistrina, and it's a fantastic facility right by the sea that enables us to do these different experiments.
What do you think, how do you think international collaborations such as the one that you're doing right now can contribute to solving marine conservation issues?
I mean, I think they're key, because then, around the globe, not only, do we have differences in culture and our views, but we have different perspectives on conservation, and we can learn from one another. And so I think it's hugely beneficial to share that knowledge so that we can all benefit from those different perspectives and different techniques and different approaches for conservation, or in the case of an invasive species, for controlling that species. So one of the things that we've talked about while we're here is, how do you get people to eat blue crabs, because they're not used to eating them here? Well, maybe we can learn some of that from, across the pond, where the green crabs that are native to the parts of the Mediterranean and Europe are actually invasive in the United States, and we're trying to get people to eat those. And so by sort of maybe cross-fertilizing that knowledge base, we can help that situation, so both in conservation terms and in invasive species control.
Going outside of the blue crabs, can you tell me one thing that you learned here in Dubrovnik, either by living here or through our Department of Applied Ecology?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it was it's fascinating to have learned, you know, if you travel a bit, history is always something that you sort of focus on, and the amazing sort of layers of history that Dubrovnik have from, you know, going back through time. But one of just that maybe it's something to be used in trivia that was fascinating that I found out is that the Republic of Dubrovnik was the first, I guess, country at the time, its own independent, to recognize the independence of the United States from England. So one small thing, but just, you know, just the fact that, you know, that Dubrovnik was its own republic for a long period of time, and all that history is just fascinating.
I have to ask, have you seen Game of Thrones before?
Oh, of course, yes, yes. And we walked on the stairs, Cersei's stairs of shame when we were in the old town, of course. Yes.
I just had to ask. Now going back, how do you think global climate change is affecting marine ecosystems, especially in the areas such as, you know, the Mediterranean or the Atlantic Ocean? Well,
I think one of the big things it's doing is it's changing the distribution of organisms. So some organisms are sort of being driven out of the places that they historically resided in and are moving into new areas. Some organisms are expanding their range. And I think sort of that links to probably what's occurring to some degree in the Mediterranean with invasive species. As the Mediterranean warms, you have more, it's becoming more conducive to warmer water species like lionfish. And I'm not going to say blue crabs are warmer water species, but they don't like super cold water. So as the northern Mediterranean has warmed, it probably to some degree has facilitated the movement or the expansion of the blue crab populations in those areas. So yeah, it has a big effect on that. And the movement of parasites and pathogens that might have been restricted are now sort of moving into those warmer waters that used to be cold.
How fast can we expect for even more species to come now that, you know, the oceans, I mean the sea here, is getting warmer?
Well, as far as new species coming, I think we've learned a lot about how invasive species arrive. So I think a lot of the mechanisms have been put in place to try and restrict those arrivals. I think a lot of arrivals, like the blue crabs, arrived again around the 1940s in the ballast water of ships. So it was a long time before I think we realized that all these marine organisms, like crustaceans particularly, and other organisms that have long larval periods, so they reproduce, they produce larvae that are just in the water column for a long period of time, are able to, as you know, big container ships take up water as ballast, that they take up these organisms and then they move them from one place to the next. That's been a huge mechanism for moving species around. I think now that we have a better handle on that and that regulations are put in place to control the discharge of that ballast water, that the numbers of introductions have been reduced, at least in the marine environment, I think, you know, through time. Although managing those that are here is still a challenge, and there's still going to be some that arrive. But I think we're doing better when it comes to that than we used to.
Continuing on the topic of climate change, sort of, in your opinion, what are the most significant threats to marine life today, and how can we address them?
Yeah, I mean, as far as climate change goes, I mean, the way we address it is controlling, you know, the production of greenhouse gases and all of the different ways that that's done, from our own automobiles and plane flights and everything else that produce and burning of fossil fuels for power, what have you, is reducing that. That's probably the best way to do it. I mean, as far as what the threats are to marine organisms, it's all the things that come from that increase in carbon dioxide, from the warming of the oceans, which has huge impacts on things like coral reefs, where they're sort of getting pushed out of that zone where they can actually exist, and they bleach and die, and we're losing coral reefs. But then also water is becoming more acidified. So the more CO2 that we put in the atmosphere, the more of it dissolves into the water. The more CO2 dissolves into the water, the more acidic it gets. And that has implications for organisms that have shells, like clams and oysters and crustaceans and things like that. So those are some of the biggest threats from climate change, is temperature and probably acidification.
So rounding it up, kind of going back to your collaboration, I mean your reason why you're here in our TV studio to begin with, what advice would you give to students who want to pursue a career in marine science and ecology?
I would say if you want to have a career in marine science, you look into what those jobs like. I mean, a lot of folks are drawn to the marine environment. It's a beautiful, fantastic place to be. People have great memories. But look at the kinds of jobs that you might be able to get. Try and figure out where in marine science you see yourself once you get your degree, and try and get experience in those fields. If you can, as an undergraduate, especially when you first get to university, or even before as a secondary school in the U.S. secondary or high school, try and get experience in those fields and see what you would like to do. And so that then you can, as you move through university, you can focus on getting the skills you need to be successful. But, and like I think I would say with just about any field, you want to find a career that you love and that you, day in and day out, you're going to it, not because you have to, because it's a job, but because it's something that you like to do. And then you happen to get paid for it. And that's sort of, I think anybody would want to have a job like that, right? So.
That's true. Does living by the sea help?
Of course, yes. I mean, the closer you are to the sea, especially if that's your job, the closer you are the place that makes you happy and makes you productive. And of course, there are more jobs by the sea than there are inland, right? If you're going to be a marine scientist, but not to say that that totally precludes you. I mean, because throughout the U.S. and probably here as well, we have inland universities and government agencies that employ folks that do marine research. But you don't have to be by the sea, but it's helpful.
Well, thank you very much for this interview. I look forward to eating blue crab.
Yes, you should. It's probably pound for pound, I think, the best seafood in the sea, if you ask me.
Well, now my appetite is going. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Bio je to profesor Donald Behringer sa School of Forest, Fisheries and Geomatics Sciences Sveučilišta u Floridi. Ja sam Klara Zuanić, a mi se vidimo u još jednom UNIDU intervju.